So this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nataly Gattegno. She is the co-founder and managing design partner for Future Cities Lab, which is an experimental design studio, workshop, and architectural think tank. They have used their experimental and interactive approach to create a range of projects that all explore the intersection of design with advanced fabrication, responsive building design, and urban space. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Nataly Gattegno, who's going to talk with us about cities, interactive design, and public space.
Thank you. No, I'm good. I think I need this. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Yes. Good morning, and a warm welcome to all of you to the Bay Area. It's an honor and a privilege to be presenting the work to the Meetings of the Mind family. So thank you to the team that made this happen. I'm excited to share with you the work that we do just across the Bay. I can potentially see my office. That's kind of nice to be this far removed. And I wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts and share a couple of projects to illustrate some of those thoughts about the work that we do. So the work that you'll see and the work that I'll present explores the intersections of the natural and the artificial, the digital and the analog, the real and the virtual. We're interested in exploring and experimenting with a seemingly simple idea or a seemingly simple question. What is the relationship of the things that we build with the things in the context that surround them? So what is the relationship between our buildings, our artwork, our cities, and the context that surrounds them? And for us, that context could be temperature, weather, climate, people, social media feeds, internet or online kind of open accessible information. So what I'd like to do in my 15 minutes is go through 3 projects that try to kind of explore this idea at 3 very, very different scales. And I would love to be able to reserve some time for questions at the end, so think away. And there's a series of microphones, I've been told, to remind you in the middle of the room that I would love to have a dialogue with all of you. So I'd like to jump right in and basically present to you guys one of the projects that we've recently kind of done at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and I know Deborah Cullinan is speaking here, so I wanted to give you a prelude to maybe some of the things that she'll be discussing tomorrow. But Lightswarm explores, let's say, the sonic qualities of the city. So going back to that context that I talked about, so how do the things that we build respond and interact with the things that surround them? In this case, we were really interested in exploring the sonic qualities of the city and the kind of way that buildings, in this case, could actually respond to sound that surrounds them. So this is the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. The installation was embedded in the facade that faces Moscone Gardens and the Metreon movie theater. And we were really interested in kind of testing out the ability of our buildings to actually respond to data. So could they sense and respond to data? So instead of building facades actually sealing out everything that comes from the outside and completely blocking that kind of possible relationship that could exist between an interior space and an exterior space, what could actually happen if they actually became dynamic urban interfaces? So Lightswarm occupies this kind of large-scale facade, and there's a series of vibration sensors embedded in the facade. So as you walk up to it and clap maybe, or tap the glass, or a bus goes by, or an airplane flies up in the sky close, these vibration sensors capture that motion, and then a swarm of, in this case, pink light actually animates the facade and kind of moves through the larger kind of window that faces the public park. So this kind of constant feedback between inside and outside, the city and the gallery, kind of create this kind of ever-changing interface, this kind of negotiation between things that are happening inside the museum, depending on the kind of event, and outside. The Lightswarm is made of a series of different kind of materials, all digitally fabricated, 3D printed components, laser cut and milled, and it occupied the facade for 2 years. and was actually kind of installed in a way that it could be dismounted and reinstalled at other times. The kind of playfulness of the facade was really interesting. People walk up to it, clap their hands, move along, or kind of walk up across it. One of the things that I kind of wanted to maybe give you a sense of the kind of work that we do is, on the one hand, digitally, let's say, we use digital tools to actually kind of produce it, but it's also incredibly handcrafted. And that's one of the things that we really kind of enjoy in the work that we do. So these are images of our shop space across the bay. We basically have a design studio and also a shop space that we actually produce and make all of our work. So everything that I'll show you is actually made in-house, from the electronics to the kind of complex geometries and form. We design them, we fabricate them, we assemble them, and we install them. And we kind of have this kind of interest in the way that these kind of responsive systems could actually start becoming much more ubiquitous. They could potentially describe cities. In this case, this is a speculative model for a series of fog-catching feathers that could extend out on piers and capture late afternoon fog on the bay. So the kind of the work that we do really explores that kind of connection between the kind of internet technology and the built environment. And we have kind of explored that through Lightswarm in a kind of interesting way, because a lot of these installations are actually ones that we can remotely control. So we can actually go in and remotely change color, change behavior, change speed. And one night with Lightswarm, we actually did that. One night, we were able to kind of get into the museum late. We got to know the guard, who just allowed us to basically hack our own installation and test out different modes of interaction that we could actually program this piece to have. For a motion-based interaction, so something that would actually track you as you moved up and down the stairs in a much more kind of one-to-one, or a camera tracking kind of version of this, which would be maybe more towards the kind of public side of the park, to actually kind of allow you to maybe play with it or dance with it or have a different kind of, let's say, relationship with the installation, or of course, direct user interaction. So could this become an urban graffiti interface, or you could actually draw on it using your phone in this case. So this experiment for us was, we were only able to do this, for a couple of hours late one night. But it actually proved to us that there's something really interesting about these kinds of installations and how they have the ability to morph and change, whether it's the input that's kind of fed into them, or their responsiveness and their representation. And this happens at multiple scales, and I think that's one of the things that I'd like to share with you. A project that is currently underway, so I'm showing renderings because we're in prototyping phase. But this is a much larger scale project in Washington, D.C. It's the kind of, so north of Union Station, there's a series of underpasses where Amtrak, Metro North, all of the train tracks basically come right into Union Station. And there's a series of really dark underpasses that actually separate two very, very distinctly different neighborhoods that are growing and rapidly changing. So here you're seeing the kind of larger context. And we won a competition to light the underpass. The competition was a lighting competition to actually kind of provide adequate lighting underneath in these kinds of spaces with a kind of arts component to it. So Lightweave weaves these two neighborhoods through light. It actually kind of connects and kind of, it's almost like urban tissue that kind of connects the two sides of the neighborhood. On the, I think it's right for you guys, is a residential neighborhood, and then the left-hand side is where NPR's headquarters are, Google's headquarters are moving in. So there's a kind of very distinct different fabric on either side. And Lightweave responds to people moving through. So there's a series of cameras that actually track you and provide adequate lighting for you as you move through the tunnel. So there'll be, let's say, safety lighting for most of the time, but as you walk through this really long tunnel, probably every day if you're a commuter, or maybe every now and then as you're crossing through, the cameras would actually track you and kind of give you almost like an aura to move through. The project just passed the Federal Commission of Fine Arts. It's an interesting and curious project because all 4 sides of this volume are owned by a different entity. So the ground is basically regulated by one entity, the wall by another, the roof by the train, maybe 3 train lines, and then the street by someone else. So we're only allowed to touch the ground to do this piece. So it's proven to be an interesting yet complex kind of set of, let's say, parameters to take on. But our idea with this project is that it actually evolves, it changes, it actually maybe provides some sort of an animated environment underneath this space, but it also becomes part of the infrastructure. And for us, that's a kind of really interesting aspect of this scale of work. At a certain point, we're also talking about it sometimes cueing into the vibration of the trains above, because there's a train station close by, so maybe if the lights changed color, you knew that your train was coming. So you'd actually be able to read artwork in this case as part of infrastructure, the same way that you get the train time from your phone. The last project that I wanted to share with you guys is called Murmur Wall, and this is actually up right now at Yerba Buena Gardens in downtown San Francisco. So it's on Mission Street and the kind of pathway that leads to the Moscone Center Convention Center. And this piece operates at a very different scale. I would say it's a much more intimate scale. Murmur Wall actually feeds into, on the one hand, the Internet of Things. It's actually pulling data from the Internet, but it's also giving passersby the ability to post to it. So Murmur Wall actually captures it captures trending search terms in a half-mile radius. So it gives you a sense of what people in a half-mile radius from San Francisco, kind of downtown, are actually searching for. So in our mind's eye, that's like a way to kind of understand what's actually going on in the city, because people are actually searching for those terms or interested in finding out more information about these things. And I'd like to share a quick video that will maybe talk a little bit about the process. So the piece sits in this kind of interstitial space between a park, a street, a museum, and it actually captures the way people move through this plaza. It's made through this kind of structural lattice with a series of 3D printed orbs that hold these screens. And on these orbs, you're basically seeing information coursing from these kind of local search terms. But then the museum is also able to post like the next set of questions that they want the city to actually kind of consider. It's been interesting with the election cycle. Now when you go to visit it, it's essentially entirely all about the kind of most current election scandal or event that takes place. But what's been interesting is the ability to actually whisper to it. We call it, the ability to kind of speak to it, where people are actually able to kind of see their own information go up there. So I could walk up to it and text it, my name is Natalie, and it would actually kind of course through the entire system, override the local information, because at that point you're hyper-local. It's part of your own kind of input, and then it kind of courses through the system and is released back into the city. So these projects for us have been really, really important experiments. And though and they've in some ways proven that environments like these are not necessarily singular. They can actually be spatial, visceral, and environmental, and primarily interconnected. So for us, these installations, though they may appear as like singular, one-off art pieces, they actually describe a future city where our buildings, our plazas, our public spaces can actually be ecosystems of interconnected experiences. So what if a facade could speak to a plaza, could speak to a ceiling, could speak to another space 3 blocks over? What if they could talk to one another, and what if they could respond to one another? So these environments can be rich in information, they can be open source, responsive, participatory, and in our hope, beautiful as well. Thank you very much. A couple of minutes for questions. Here we go. From Cleveland, congrats. Since I met you this morning.
I know. So here's my question. First off, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. Sorry. Thanks for a fantastic presentation. So my question is, in the previous panel, we talked about how we can make government more responsive using technology. And one of the things I was struck by is when you talked about the instance where you had the different municipalities that operated different sides. Could you talk about it from your vantage point, how that kind of multi-layered approach to government affected your work, and how government in this particular case could be more helpful or supportive to helping you advance your cause? So how can we navigate that when we encounter that multi-layered issue?
That's a good question, and it's actually been something that we've the Washington, D.C. project, that's kind of why I put it up there, although it's still raw and in the making. The difficulties are obvious. Contracting has taken 2 years to actually kind of negotiate that like 3-dimensional volume of jurisdictions, which has been interesting, but maybe not the most expedient way to actually get something to move through the process. So I think for us, it's also been really important because it's actually helped shape the parameters. So we know that we can only touch the ground, and in some ways that limitation as a designer has actually been pretty helpful because I know that there's only certain things I can work with. A lot of the work we do is percent for art. So a lot of the public artwork that we do now are percent for art projects, which has been a really interesting and kind of growing model for a lot of cities. We're doing a couple of those, one in Albany, just over here as well. So there's ways that I think the percent for art support, the ability for cities to provide grants for this kind of work is one kind of route, but then also the kind of processes by which some of these projects go through are essentially akin to infrastructure projects going through. Like we're tied to the way the entire bridge is going to get rehabilitated. So we're part of that whole contract, although our piece is probably the last piece that's going to go in and has nothing to do with the road surface that's going to be put. So the fact that artwork, this kind of work, gets bundled into that, I think adds a layer of complexity that probably isn't necessary. Yes, last quick question, and then I'll move on.
Hi, what an interesting idea about the, excuse me, interactivity. It just made me think, would it be possible, and I guess it would, since technology seems to make anything possible, but if you had that interactivity right there in that local environment, I think that's fascinating. What are people searching for, talking about? What are their ideas? And could you connect that, like have almost like an exchange with a sister city, for example, and then they'd see what those folks are doing and vice versa, and then maybe schools would do that, for art and education and connection in schools?
Yeah, we had so the predecessor to Murmurwall was a project called Data Grove, would actually channel trending Twitter search terms on it. And it was interesting when we were installing that, it was going through, I think I mentioned this to some of you guys last night, like it was going through the day's like TV soap opera thing, because that seemed to be what everyone locally seemed to be searching, like Justin Bieber, Kim Kardashian. But at a certain point, it kind of piped in Libya, Benghazi, US Embassy. All of the orbs basically were giving information that was actually global information. So that was one kind of piece to this. And then the other kind of, maybe more directly to your question, that was an installation that we were asked to represent California in a biennial in China. And in that case, we were not allowed to pipe real-time online information. So we went through this. The project never happened. We never were able to take the installation there, but we were contemplating actually feeding California or San Francisco information to Shanghai, or let's say remote information to a particular place to have that dialogue. So that's something that we've explored. We haven't had the chance to try it out, but we think it actually has some really interesting cultural opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie, so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.